I think this is the second or the third time I'm reading what was Shiju's thesis. And so when he asked me to speak about the thesis, again, I said, oh, now, not once more. Now, Satish Chandra Bose has done this nice job of summarizing Shiju's work, and he's made my task a lot simpler. So, yeah, I mean, one of the features about this panel is that Shiju's asked me to introduce the context of the book. So I may go on for 20 minutes. If I go on a little longer, you'll have to forgive me for transgressing the function of a chair, which is just to moderate the discussion. You can see Irfan laughing over here. Now, it is of course then indeed an honor to be invited by the Kerala Modernities Collective to talk about Shiju's book, Contested Knowledge. And sometimes I think it should be called the co-production of knowledge. And I'll tell you why. I have pointed out elsewhere that the work of two students from JNU, Shiju and Vishwanath Das, from different departments independently, mark or inaugurate studies on the contextualist public understanding of science as an interdisciplinary field of investigation. And their particular approach could be labeled the critical interpretive approach to the studies of science and the public. In a way, my own education in this area commenced with the supervision of the work of these two outstanding students. And as a supervisor, one must really huff and puff and run around to stay just one step ahead of the work of our students. This, of course, I have now stopped doing. In Shiju's case, he has woven a tapestry, an interdisciplinary tapestry from the perspective of STS, political theory, and media theory. And I was wondering whether that's what probably brings both these books together, because there is an aspect of in Shiju's argument where science itself, where I disagree with him, where science itself is performance. So, but that apart, I'm not comment meaningfully. I'm not competent to comment meaningfully on the last of the strands, namely the media. And so I shall restrict my remarks to the STS perspective and democracy, and leave both the discussants to take up that side of Shiju's work. Now, Shiju's interest in science and society was closely associated with the concerns of the democratization of science. And this is something I knew from the time he'd been an MPhil student. The democratization of science in contemporary India, and particularly with the role of social movements. And in his MPhil study of the KSSP, you see ample evidence of the seriousness of this concern. In a way then, a deeper STS concern brings his work together, namely the question of the public participation in science, the forms of public participation, and towards the end of the book, and if we see his work as it has evolved over the last couple of years, the concern is about the role of the expert and expert knowledge. Now, the early 1990s was a period when a decade-old research program in the West called the Public Understanding of Science began to strike roots on Indian science in research institutes like NISTADS and in several departments where STS was being pursued, including the Delhi School of Economics, as well as it was taken up in a way which of course legitimized their own work by funding agencies of science like the Department of Science and Technology and the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, which funded a lot of what are called attitude surveys. And these attitude surveys sought to measure the distance separating popular notions, conceptions, and understanding of science and that of the scientist. As Martin Bauer, the sociologist of science, put it rather playfully, they were trying to measure the extent to which the public is Popperian. how far is the public conception of science, how distant it is from paupers. And in that sense, it was the founding prevalence of the public understanding of science was a deficit theory. What you were measuring was a deficit. And there would always be a deficit between the scientist's understanding of science and the public's understanding of science. Now, this was also the time when there arose a dissatisfaction with deficit models, whether it was in modernization theory, so in the sociology of science, that resulted in a turn to the anthropology of knowledge, the study of local knowledge and context in interaction with scientific experts and institutionally legitimated knowledge. And so was the contextualist or critical interpretive approach to the public understanding of science born. And in signaling this departure from the deficit model of the public understanding of science, what the contextualists were doing were they were saying that we are not interested in the public understanding of science, we are interested in the scientist's misunderstanding of the public. So it was a switch around in a way in the focus. Now, the problem of the public participation in science, in Shiju's work, is exemplified, and the previous speaker has already introduced you to the book, is exemplified through 4 public controversies that erupted in Kerala's complex public sphere, or within a space Shiju called the scientific public sphere, improvising upon the Habermasian notion, and clearly drawing upon his understanding of social movements in Kerala, but now expanding upon this space into a wider domain, farming out into a complex web of social relationships and other spheres and institutional spaces. And over here, my one question to Kerala would be that would Shiju's analysis have been any different if Kerala were endowed in the 1970s and the 1980s with the kind of institutions that Karnataka, Maharashtra, or Bengal had. In fact, whereas the social imagination of science in Kerala was very strong from the beginning of the 20th century, Kerala was not endowed with the kind of scientific institutions which these other states had. And the Kerala Committee of Science and Technology was actually constituted to build some of these scientific institutions. So my question then would be, with the story having different. Okay, but clearly the controversy studied, the actors involved, and the nature of controversies themselves carry the impress of Kerala's particular history of the institutionalization of science since the late 19th century. And as the work of another doctoral student working with me, Unikrishnan, shows, it suggests or carries the signature of a social imaginary of science that echoes startling continuities as it does change. And historians of science, ever since Livingstone's book, over the past 2 decades, have addressed these, what you might call, these different geographies of knowledge. Now, ever since the publication of Novotny's and et al.'s book called The New Production of Knowledge, and the sequel to Novotny's book, the social theory of science is focused upon the conditions under which scientific knowledge is produced, circulated and legitimated. And one of the features of this transformation is the public participation and engagement in science. That has, in time, given rise to social mobilization, policy initiatives, and scholarly research. Yesterday, Sukumar rang me up and asked me, what is PES, this public engagement with science? Now, in order to embark on his engagement with these controversies, the early chapters of the book outline his general interpretative framework. Through each of the controversies throws up, as the previous speaker pointed out, a unique manifestation of possible forces, alignments that shape the controversy, and the manner in which the controversy reaches closure. Though the ultimate question as to how it impacts on knowledge so produced, this question needs to be addressed. For in the final analysis, the closure of a controversy must have an impact on the dominion of knowledge. And it is in this context I then reiterate my earlier question that I wonder why Shiju did not title his book The Co-Production of Knowledge. Alright, given the expansion of the social space within which these controversies occurred. Now, as pointed out, the engagement with the public participation or engagement with science was an outcome of the crisis of the deficit model. And the deficit model was a simplistic, linear, paternalistic model describing the communication of science from expert to layperson. And the model drew its legitimacy from the so-called popular misunderstanding of science, because in the process it was considered to be distorted en route through poor translation and media devices. This came with the recognition that the opposition to techno-scientific innovation was a product of an information deficit. And the contextualist understanding of public understanding of science, or the critical perspective, argued against this deficit. A disjunction, therefore, there was a disjunction between the expert and the general public. Now, the important realization, for example, when I turn to the work of Vishwanath Das, who worked on the question as to why do fishermen communities who live along the most cyclone-prone districts of Kerala not respond to cyclone warnings. Orissa, the most cyclone-prone districts of Orissa not respond to cyclone warnings. Is it superstition? What is it that they respond to? And of course, I mean, Vishwanath Das's thesis argued that it had nothing to do with superstition or cultural prejudices or a poor understanding of science. So the opposition between impoverished lay knowledge and qualitatively accurate knowledge was a false one. It was a red herring. Lay knowledge, rather than being a low kind of expert knowledge, was just qualitatively different. And that both are, in a way, socially and culturally contingent, just as modern science is culturally, institutionally embedded science is culturally contingent, so is lay knowledge. And one is reminded here of Gandhi's rejection of some industrial technologies, since he believed it encapsulated the interests of other than those of the toiling classes. The question then is not of understanding science or of technological savoir-faire, but as Wynne says, the question is one of social intelligence. The institutional transformation of the system of knowledge production has generated different levels of communicative action and incorporated actors that are external to the research system, with which has come the recognition that lay knowledge introduces new knowledge and competences that enhance the knowledge generation process. Social movements seek a role where their knowledge and concerns are not seen as impediments, rather than producing knowledge independently or in separate contexts, but rather they encounter, expert and lay knowledge encounter each other in what are called hybrid forums. Medical research provides us with a convincing instantiation of these processes of co-production. Which again leads me to the question I posed to Shiju. Further, public mobilization on techno-science issues has become more frequent since the 1990s, demanding a greater role in decisions on research and technovation. This sphere has been dominated by NGOs and new social movements. These have provided organizational support, channels of recruitment, and even been knowledge, and these movements have become knowledge producers on issues relating to the environment and the protection of health. The case of the Center of Science and Environment is one such case, where a social movement has become a prominent generator of knowledge. And herein lies the irony of science and the risks it brings with it. So for many social movements, technoscience is seen as an instrument of dominant power and the propagator of a perverse globalization. On the other hand, science and technology provide the data, the models, the resources, the communication networks to challenge the dominant paradigm, as Castells has pointed out. These ambiguous and deep connections ensure that new social movements become integrated into the knowledge production networks and in many cases set up their own, these networks establish their own laboratories. In the earthquake controversy that Shiju takes up, you could see, further, these could have been further avenues for the exploration of the co-production of knowledge. Shiju's chapter on the cancer drug trials not only raises issues of science and ethics, but that of multiple scientific expertise and law. For the law not only draws on scientific expertise and certified knowledge, but plays a role in defining what is legally admissible and sometimes even in defining what is considered to be scientific proof. One is again reminded here of the Foucauldian insight into the relationship between the protocols of scientific investigation and the inquisitorial procedures that he speaks of. A last issue I would like to flag is not just about science and democracy, but the risks that come with the advances of science and technology. Most of societies are ill-equipped to handle these risks, and the capacity for social innovation needs to be supplemented by the existing resources of technovation. And as Shiju's book argues, the media is a powerful player in orchestrating, modulating social protest, and I will also say in manipulating the relationship between the expert knowledge and policy making, thereby selecting and legitimating experts in the public arena. These activities erode the imaginary of scientific neutrality and the relationship of expertise as grounded in interest splinters the consensus around scientific claims. The corrosive effects of the media are similar to those produced, as Sheila Jasanoff points, when science repeatedly goes to the bar. One of the thinkers on science and democracy has been Michel Callot, and he has pointed out that in risk societies, there is a double delegation on which democracy is founded. And this delegation collapses at some point. Now, what is this double delegation about? The first level of delegation is knowledge about the world is delegated to scientists, and that of the socio-political is delegated to politicians. This delegation was possible when uncertainty could be confined to the sites of the production of knowledge. It didn't spill out into the public. But what we see in the risk society is that this risk spills out, the uncertainties of science spill out into the public space. And at that point, this double delegation breaks down. The larger question then is, how does one reconceptualize democracy in a society where risk is endemic to the process of knowledge production? And this is another of the questions that comes up in Shiju's work. The last theme, but more an emergent one is in Shiju's work is that of expertise and the public engagement with it, which through the media throws up other forms of expertise. Ethno-epistemic assemblages of experts, citizens, stakeholders, etc. I see this new generation of studies in India as attempts to re-examine and rework the relationship between science and democracy. In an article I wrote for a book edited by Romila Thapar on the role of the public intellectual, I argued that the relationship between science and democracy, as it was envisioned during the European Enlightenment, that relationship has come undone. The new STS scholarship appears to suggest that science could still contribute to enriching democratic forms of argumentation. So which is a revival of an old argument proposed by John Dewey in the 1930s. But these studies in the public engagements with science could still unveil the new possibilities. So I think with these remarks, I now request my friend Sukumar